Welcome to Zero Fertility Future. I'm your host, Taklo, and in today's episode, I'll be reading my keynote presentation titled Unraveling Demographics, the Implications of a Zero Fertility Future. In this talk, I explore the global challenges brought on by declining fertility rates and how this demographic shift will impact economies, healthcare, and national security. This isn't just a crisis of numbers, it's a call to action for innovation, policy change, and proactive solutions. So let's dive into the keynote and unpack the implications of a zero fertility future. Good evening, everyone. I'm Taklo, Chief Vision Officer at Kadum. Tonight, I want to talk about something that has the potential to reshape our world in ways many of us haven't yet considered. It's not some distant, hypothetical problem. It's happening as we speak. The issue of declining fertility rates and what it means for our future. We're not talking about some abstract statistic here. We're talking about the possibility of entire societies shrinking, collapsing under the weight of aging populations. It's a future where our children and grandchildren might live in a world very different from the one we know today. And the scariest part, it's closer than we think. We are just 2 generations away from population collapse. Think about that for a moment. 2 generations. That means our children and their children could be living in a world where population decline isn't a concern for the future, but a harsh, daily reality. The consequences are enormous. Fewer workers driving the economy, an aging population putting strain on social services, and entire industries left struggling to stay afloat. Imagine a world where retirement is no longer guaranteed, where the healthcare system is unable to care for the sick and elderly. What will it feel like to live in that world? Who will look after us as we age? These aren't far-off, speculative questions. This is the world we are headed toward unless we make serious changes. 2 generations. That's the window we have before the foundation starts to crack. And when that happens, the ripple effects will be felt across every part of society. Let's fast forward to the year 2084. This is the point in time when things start to unravel, when the slow creep of demographic decline turns into a full-blown crisis. Imagine walking through a city in 2084. Empty homes, silent streets, businesses shuttered. Hospitals, once bustling with life, now overwhelmed by elderly patients, understaffed and underfunded. This is where we're headed if nothing changes. Ask yourself, what does a world look like where economies shrink instead of grow? Where nations are competing for survival, not prosperity? It's not a dystopian movie. It's a very real possibility if we ignore the signals today. One of the first places we've already seen the effects of this future is in real estate. When population numbers fall, demand for housing declines and prices drop. We've all heard stories of towns in Italy where you can buy a house for just €1. Why? Because no one's there to live in them. But what happens when this isn't limited to small villages? What happens when real estate in major cities begins to lose its value because there simply aren't enough people to fill the homes? Imagine owning a home that is suddenly worth half or even a quarter of what you paid for it. How does that impact your savings, your family's wealth, and your future? As populations age, another worrying trend is already rearing its head: financial fraud targeting the elderly. With fewer young people around to look after their parents or grandparents, older generations become easy targets for scammers. In Hong Kong, just recently, an elderly woman lost 60 million Hong Kong dollars to fraudsters. She didn't have anyone to protect her from being taken advantage of. Now imagine this on a massive scale. Millions of elderly people, isolated and vulnerable, with fewer family members or resources to safeguard them. How do we protect our most vulnerable in a world where the very systems designed to care for them are strained to the breaking point? already had a glimpse of what an overstretched healthcare system looks like during the COVID-19 pandemic. Hospitals pushed to the brink, doctors and nurses working around the clock, supplies running thin. Now imagine that scenario, but it never ends. An aging population puts relentless pressure on healthcare systems. Fewer doctors, nurses, and caregivers will be available to take care of more and more elderly patients. What will happen when there just aren't enough hands to provide care? In a zero fertility future, the consequences are clear. Longer wait times, fewer available beds, and potentially millions of people not getting the care they need. Can we really afford to face this kind of healthcare crisis? Shrinking population doesn't just affect healthcare or housing. It affects the very food we eat. Agriculture relies heavily on human labor, and with fewer workers available, it becomes harder and harder to produce enough food to meet demand. What happens when there aren't enough people to farm, harvest, and distribute food? We've already seen hints of this during the pandemic, with empty shelves in grocery stores. But in a future with fewer workers and shrinking economies, those empty shelves could become a regular sight. Can you imagine walking into a store only to find that basic staples like bread and milk are nowhere to be found? What will that do to prices, to livelihoods, to global stability? Challenges of a declining population aren't just economic, they're also a matter of national security. Take Ukraine, for example. Part of the reason they've struggled in their defense against Russia is their declining population. With fewer young men and women available to serve in the military, Ukraine is at a significant disadvantage. In a world where population numbers directly affect military strength, countries with shrinking populations could face similar vulnerabilities. Fewer soldiers mean weaker defenses, making nations more susceptible to external threats. If the trend of population decline continues, what happens to the balance of power in the world? How will countries protect themselves when they simply don't have the manpower to do so? We've covered the challenges, and they are daunting. But now, let's talk about solutions. There is still time to change the trajectory, but the solutions are not without complexity. They require us to rethink immigration, expansion, government policy, and even how we use technology. The future isn't set in stone, and we have the power to shape it. But the big question is, do we have the courage to make the necessary changes before it's too late? Immigration is one of the most commonly proposed solutions to population decline. By welcoming young workers from other countries, we can help offset the shrinking workforce and keep economies afloat. But immigration isn't a perfect solution. It comes with its own set of challenges. Questions of national identity, sovereignty, and integration. We've seen across the world how rapid immigration can cause social tensions. How do we balance the need for more people with the preservation of cultural identity? What happens to the social fabric of a nation when its demographic makeup changes too quickly? Historically, nations expanded into new territories to address demographic and economic pressures. But in today's geopolitical climate, military expansion isn't ethical or even feasible. What does that leave us with? In a world where expansion is no longer an option, how do nations secure their futures when their populations are in decline? Could we see more creative forms of expansion, like economic or technological domination? These are questions we will need to grapple with in the coming decades. Some governments are already taking bold steps to address declining birth rates. In South Korea, for example, the government has invested $270 billion into policies aimed at boosting birth rates, offering generous subsidies, childcare, and workplace reforms to encourage families to have more children. But despite these efforts, the results have been slow. Can government intervention really reverse this trend, or are we facing a problem that requires deeper societal change? How do we make having children more appealing in a world where the cost of living is skyrocketing and balancing work and family is becoming increasingly difficult? Finally, let's talk about technology and AI. As populations shrink, automation and AI will become essential tools in keeping our economies running. From automated healthcare systems to AI-driven agriculture, technology can help fill the gaps left by a declining workforce. But can technology really replace human care? How do we balance the need for innovation with the importance of human touch, especially in sectors like healthcare? AI can help us, but it can't replace us. The real challenge will be integrating technology in a way that enhances, rather than diminishes, our humanity. In conclusion, the future we're facing is complex, uncertain, and full of challenges. But it's not without hope. We have the tools, the knowledge, and the ability to navigate this future, but we need to act now. The solutions are there, but they require bold decisions, long-term thinking, and perhaps most importantly, the will to make tough choices. Thank you for your time. I hope this conversation has sparked some new thinking about the path we're on, and I'm happy to take any questions. That was my keynote, Unraveling Demographics, the Implications of a Zero Fertility Future. As we confront the reality of these demographic shifts, it's clear that the future demands new strategies and solutions. Whether through policy, technology, or societal change, we must be prepared to tackle these challenges head-on. Thank you for listening to Zero Fertility Future. If you found this episode insightful, I encourage you to subscribe, share it with others, and join me in exploring more of these critical issues in future episodes. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.